Good morning and welcome to this last day, not in Almedalen but at Säkerhetspolitiskt Sommartorg. This morning's first panel discussion is Religion, a peace-building force? And it's hosted by the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation, Kristna Fredsrörelsen. My name is Sofia Wahlen, and I'm the General Secretary for the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation, and I'm also moderating this seminar. Before we begin, I have some practical information. Firstly, this seminar is 60 minutes, which means we have to finish at 10 o'clock. And I think some of the panelists will still be here. If you want to talk more to them, we can do it outside, because there's another seminar coming in. If you would like to Twitter, please do. There's a hashtag called Sommartorg, so use it, and then other people can read about what's happening here at the seminar. And another thing is that this seminar is broadcasted, and that means everybody has to speak in the microphone, and that also means the audience when we have questions for the audience later. So if you have questions, you have to wait for the microphone. So, why have we invited you to talk on this topic? Well, in several regions in the world, religious divisions are of growing importance. We have witnessed and are witnessing growing tensions and conflicts between religious groups in the Middle East and also partly in Sweden. So today we want to talk about which are some of the greatest challenges when it comes to religion and conflict in today's world. We will present different perspectives to shed some light from these different perspectives on these issues, and focus of how can we minimize the risk for future conflicts among religious divisions. Examples will be given from current research on religion and conflict and religion and conflict resolution, from local work here in Sweden, but also from other countries such as Colombia and Egypt. So now I'd like to present the panel that will help us with this not so very small but very important topic. First, I have Isak Svensson, Associate Professor, Uppsala Universitet, Department for Peace and Development Studies. Welcome. And second, Nofa Malla Mohammed, from Salams Vänner, a project coordinated by Swedish Muslims for Peace and Justice and the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation. You're also part of the Swedish Muslim Peace Movement. And thirdly, Emma Nilenfors, Head of Development Cooperation at the Embassy of Sweden in Colombia. And finally, Mohammed El-Medawi, teacher assistant at the Future University in Cairo and a researcher in peace and conflict studies, specialized in Islam and the social movements. Welcome, all of you. You will each give a brief presentation on the issue on religion and conflict, or religion and peace building, through your area of expertise and experience. And after that, we will have a panel discussion between the four of you. And after that, if there's time, and I hope there will be, we will open up for questions from you, the audience here. So, I will leave the word to you, Isak, to begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here this early morning. I will make three general remarks about the role of religion in conflict. And in my research, I have been examining the general global patterns of armed conflict and the religious dimensions in armed conflicts. My first remark is that most conflicts are not religious. If we look at the global pattern over time, we can see that about 3/4, 75% of the armed conflict that has been fought between 1989 and up to 2010, 75% were fought between parties from the same religious parties coming from the same religious traditions. And likewise, 75%, 3/4 of the conflict lack a religious dimension in the incompatibility. They are not about religion. So when we're talking about religion in armed conflicts, it is important to bear in mind that it is a minority of all the armed conflict that are religious, in the sense that they pose different religious parties towards each other. Christians against Muslims, Shia against Sunni, Protestants against Catholics, and so forth. These are a minority among the cases. And even among these cases, it's important to bear in mind that religion is only one of several dimensions. If we examine, for instance, the issues at stake, we can see that in some conflict, parties raise religious aspirations, but it's only one among several aspirations. And even in these, it's often not the most important one. So this is important for the discussion here today, that religions does play a role in armed conflict, but it is a minor one. My second point is that if we look at the causes of conflict, they are very rarely religious. The root causes of conflict are political or economic, and religion comes in at a later stage in a conflict. But once religion has entered into the conflict dynamics, it makes conflicts more difficult to peacefully resolve. And we can see that in systematic studies, that if you have a religious dimension in the what we call incompatibility, the issue at stake, then it's less likely that you get a negotiated settlement of a conflict. But that is not because the conflict is caused by a religious, but religious dimensions have entered into the dynamics. Third and lastly, if we look at the pattern over time, religious conflicts are becoming more common. But they are not becoming more common because they are increasing in numbers, but because the other types of conflicts are actually decreasing over time. So the proportional frequency, so to say, of religious armed conflict is increasing. So in 1975, we had 2% of all armed conflict where parties had raised religious issues. At 2010, we had 50%. So it's a quite dramatic increase, but not in actual numbers, but because of the other types of conflict has decreased over time. So that's important to bear in mind as well. So these are 3 points about the general patterns, and I will come back to implications of this in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isak, for that general points on this. We will move on to Nofa, and you will give a more a Swedish perspective of the work through your experience.
Yes. My name is Nofa, and I am the president of a local branch of Swedish Muslims for Peace and Justice called SMF Stockholm. Swedish Muslims for Peace and Justice is a relatively new but fast-growing peace organization. And we're working with leadership training and raising issues concerning religions and identity, peace and conflict. And we're aiming to be an active part of the Swedish civil society, working under the parole by Muslims for the society. Well, how did I get involved in the peace business? It started with a project called Salams Vänner, Friends of Salams. Salam means peace, and the root of the word, S, L, and M, is also building up the word for the religion, Islam. And it's also one of God's 99 names, as-salam, which means the peace. The Muslim greeting is Salamu Alaikum, which means peace be upon you. And we in Salams Vänner, Friends of Salam, are working with our religions, on the basis of religions to make peace. Sweden is often called the most secular state in the world. Despite this, many of us are working from our religions, and we want to show a new picture of religious people than media often portrays. And 60 youth have participated in Friends of Salam, Muslims and Christians, and we're now holding workshops in school organizations and companies. We have held workshops here in Almedalen and also in the Swedish parliament. I was born to Muslim parents, and when I was little, I went to mosques, and I also went to an Islamic school in elementary school. The Islamic school was like any other school, besides that we had halal food in school, which means that the meat was slaughtered in an allowed way in Islam, and that the PE, physical education lessons, was the boys was divided up between the boys and the girls, and we also had prayer on the schedule. So religion was a really natural part of my life, and I didn't really question so much until I started high school, because I found all the answers on these existential questions and what happens after life and so on in the religion. But when I started high school, I noticed that religious people were looked upon as backward-oriented and stupid. So I read more about my religion, but I only grow in my religious belief. Islam is my way of living, and as I mentioned, I can find the answers there, and for me means Islam peace. I believe in a life after death, and I believe that we will see the consequences of our actions. And I think that I have to leave this world as a little bit better place than it was when I was born to it. And God says in the Quran, in chapter 49, verse 13, that He created us that we may know one another. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also said, you will not enter paradise until you believe, and you will not believe until you love each other. Shall I show you something that, if you did, you would love each other? Spread peace between yourselves. The challenges when it comes to religions and conflicts in today's world are deeply complicated, but I will show my perspective mainly through the wisdoms and reflections that I got from this project, Friends of Salam.
Thank you, Nofa. I will also come back and ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the methods that you have used in Salams Vänner. But first I will give the word to Emma Nilafors.
Thank you, and thank you, Kristna Freds for inviting me to this interesting panel. I've been working with Latin America for the past 15 years, so I will share some of my practical experience working with Swedish Development Corporation in that region. And Latin America, you can say, is what Isaac was mentioning before. Religion is not part of the conflict in Colombia. So I will not speak so much about that. I will more speak about how religion and Catholic Church leaders can be a positive force for peace construction in Colombia. The Catholic Church in Colombia is, of course, very broad. You have everything. You have extremely conservative Opus Dei perspectives. And at the same time, you have the theology of liberation, which has been a base for committed religious leaders to work for the perspectives of the poor. And several of the Catholic leaders that I have met in remote areas of Colombia, I think, share a little bit the perspective of Desmond Tutu from South Africa, which is that those that say that Bible and politics should not mix do not read the same Bible as I do. I think several of these leaders, I'm not talking about party politics, I'm talking about politics for human rights, to promote human rights and try to change the society, to have a more equal society for the poor people. However, in Latin America, this work to promote human rights is not without risks. My first experience was in El Salvador, and when you live in El Salvador, you come into encounter with a person called Oscar Romero. He was a bishop in El Salvador. He was killed on the 24th of March in 1980 while he was conducting Mass. You call it Messa? That is how you call it? Yes, yes. So they shot him while he was conducting the Mass. Then I moved on and started working with Guatemala. In Guatemala, the Catholic Church worked during several years to collect testimonies from the victims of the armed conflict, to get the truth, to prepare a truth commission. Also, that bishop, he was called Juan Gerardi. 2 days after he presented his report, he was also killed. He was murdered in his own house on the 24th of April in 1998. So there are quite some brave people working in Latin America to promote human rights. And we from the Swedish Development Corporation are very pleased and proud that we can be part of this movement. We can be with them and provide cooperation to change the situation, to have more respect for human rights. In Colombia, where I'm working, Sweden is a partner for peace. Now, as some of you might know, there is an ongoing peace negotiation between the government and the FARC guerrilla. We are quite optimistic. We hope that there will be a peace accord, but we are also quite aware of that the peace accord is not sufficient. Then the real hard work starts when you talk about peace construction in remote areas of the country where there has been a lack of state presence. And this lack of state presence is also where the Catholic Church has been able to be present, because in some of this area the Catholic Church is the only institution present. Some of the examples of what we are supporting is a program called Salida Temporal. It's a temporary exit for threatened leaders from civil society. Through this program, the Catholic Church in Colombia is collaborating with the Catholic Church in some other Latin American countries to provide temporary exile for people who need to get out of the country. In Colombia, we see that the Swedish diplomacy and development cooperation, we work hand in hand. As my ambassador said here yesterday, we have a happy marriage. We work jointly and fully integrated. And also we need to have important dialogue with strategic actors in Colombia. And for us, the Catholic Church and their leaders is an important source of information. They have presence all over the country. They can tell us what is going on, since we don't have the possibility to travel all over. So are there not any challenges for us working with the Catholic Church in Colombia? Yes, there are. We feel that we are in line with them in several issues, like promoting human rights, but then you have some other human rights areas, for instance, sexual and reproductive rights and women's rights, where we are not always on the same side. So then we need to, I think it's important for Sweden to stand up for these issues always. Maybe I stay. I'll stop there to leave the floor for the others, and I come back.
Good. Thank you so much, Emma. For those who just came in a while back, we are talking about religion as a peace-building force, ? So welcome. And our next speaker is Mohammed Al-Madawi, a researcher from Egypt, and I give the word to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. With regards to the question of religion as a peace-building force, I think over the past half century or so, we've seen a large activity when it comes to religious dialogue, and there has been a lot of conferences held, a lot of books and compendiums compiled and authored on the issue, that we see that actually religions offer a wealth of moral and ethical frameworks that does not necessarily inherently produce conflict. So when we talk about challenges, I think we need to look within communities to understand how religion can play a role in conflicts. And for this, SWE4 had generally sponsored a study that I had the pleasure of carrying out the fieldwork for in Egypt last March, together with the Nordic Nonviolence Study Group. And we went in with this conception that there were two communities, a Muslim community and a Christian community, and that supposedly there were tensions between these two communities. But what we realized is that this conception is completely outdated, and that what matters to people most is our socioeconomic conditions and circumstances. So the primary concerns for people are not so much the religious identity as more of securing the daily necessities. Ultimately, people just want to have prosperous lives and a good ending. This is really what unites everyone. So we realized that common interests and common goals are very strong forces in the Egyptian society that supersedes that of the role that religion might play in Egypt. So when we look at some of the incidents that might be portrayed as religious conflicts within the Egyptian societies, we realize that there are three main players at stake. First, there is the political elite, the religious elite, and the media. We have spoken to a large number of people in the study, and I highly recommend this study. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. We've spoken to experts and practitioners, both from both sides of both the Muslim and the Christian community, and we realize that the conflicts that might be portrayed as religious has more to do with a conflict over interests between political leaders, and political leaders with their will to expand their power, they spread fear among their communities to be able to control members of their communities and thus have more power over them. And with that, they also communicate these interests to fundamentalist religious leaders who start playing on the religious element that separates the people. I mean, that's one of the more convenient lines of divisions between people is religion. And finally, it's the media. The media basically spreads the word of sectarianism and discrimination and hate. So I don't think that it's so much that the issue is religion within itself, but it has more to do with power. Ultimately, it is power, actually, and socioeconomic circumstances.
Thank you so much. We will also come back to you with more questions, and you will have some chance to also ask the panelists questions. But I'd like to begin with you, Isaac, because you said that you talked about conflicts and religion, saying and emphasized by Mohammed that most conflicts are not actually, the roots of armed conflicts are not in so many cases about religion. So I have two questions for you. Well, the first one is how can religion also be what we call this seminar is called peace building force. I mean, you didn't go into that too much, but can religion also be a peace building force, and in what cases? And the second question is, but you said that in relation to other armed conflicts, religious conflicts actually have increased, but it's only because the other conflicts have decreased. Why haven't also the religious conflicts decreased? Why is there a difference? So those two questions for you.
Thank you. Two very good questions. So the first one on how the implications for religious peace building. I would like to make the remark that I think there is a growing importance of conflict resolution of religious disputes. And for a long time, there's been a perception that religious conflict, so to say, if religion is part of the issue, you cannot resolve it peacefully. Think about the Taliban conflict in Afghanistan. For a long time, we have been thinking of this only in military terms, and not sort of looking for possibilities for resolving this through negotiations and ordinary sort of conflict resolution tools. And I think that's a wrong strategy, so to say. I mean, you have to also develop the mechanisms of conflict resolutions also in religious disputes. And they are the same, basically, as all conflict resolution techniques in all armed conflicts. It's about identifying the moderate core of a group, finding interests behind outspoken positions, and trying to design sort of creative solutions that address the underlying interests. And that's the same for conflict, whether there is a religious issue or not. But this has to be applied. So this is something I think the religious peace movement, so to say, needs to emphasize and put more emphasis on. And then, of course, since I said that most conflicts are not about religion, it is important to bear in mind that a lot of work that has to be done by those that are religiously motivated peace workers is also to work with non-religious issues, because this is the majority of the conflicts. Okay. So to work with all the issues about weapon industry and so forth are important implications for this.
Thank you. Nofa, you talked a bit about your own personal involvement in the Muslim peace movement, and I want to ask you two questions also. First, to elaborate a little bit more about the methods that you are using in Salams Vänner. What is it that you have been educated in, and how do you practically use it in Sweden? I mean, you talked about being in different companies in schools and everywhere, but what is it that you practically do, and how can this contribute to also in Sweden the peace challenges that we have in Sweden? And then also that I know that the Muslim peace movement have been active. I mean, we've seen in Stockholm the last months that in the suburbs we've had violence, and that I know that you've been out there, and you can tell us a bit about what you have been doing and what is your philosophy and in those challenges.
Yes, in Friends of Salam, we're working with an experience-based workshops, which means that we work with theoretical, practical, and only reflections. So, for example, if we want to talk about conflict resolutions, then we let the youth play a role playing to experience the conflict. And we have reached out to 3,000 youth until now, and the workshops are in civil courage and religious dialogue. And I would say that the lack of knowledge is really huge among the youth, and the majority of the youth don't even maybe meet religious people during their lifetime. And of this reason, it's a really big thing when we come there in their class and talking about these questions, because there's a big misunderstanding and, as I said, ignorance between among them. And when I'm standing there in front of the class with an ethnic Swede, Christian maybe, and teaching, it really gives them, it really gives a big effect, because it normalizes the view on the Muslim woman, that they also can teach, for example, and so on. And I once got the question, why are all the immigrants so nasty? And this question really shows that there is an assumption that a certain group of people act in a special way just because they come from a special part from the world, or because they believe in something special. And we really have to work with our youths to to make them believe and act upon respect, because I think that everybody would sign that respect is a really important value, and we also have to teach them, because they are our future, and to have a better society we have to work with the youth and start when they're really young. And your second question, I would say that we really have to define ourselves as Muslims. We are going to define ourselves, not someone else, because no one else has the right to do that. For example, why are the Sweden Democrats going to decide who's Muslim, for example? Or, for example, the secular people who never try to change anything in the church, or talk about what they are going to believe in or not believe in. And we also have to start with the grassroots, as I said, but we also have to be in panels like this and write debate articles and stuff like that. And it's really good that we are here today talking about these issues.
Thank you. Emma, for you also I have 2 questions. Firstly, you very interestingly pointed out that, in some areas you are totally aligned with, for example, the Catholic Church in Colombia, working on defending human rights. And on some issues it's not as easy, because maybe you have different views on, for example, women's rights, sexual reproductive rights, and in some parts maybe even the Catholic Church can counteract that work. So how come that you actually are working together when this is such an important issue for Sweden and many of us organizations? And the second, I can take the second one. You can answer first, and then I can take the second question.
No, take the second.
Okay. Okay. And the second question is, as we talked about, religion as a peace-building force, and you yourself said that the Catholic Church in Colombia plays a very great role, especially in the areas where the remote areas where the government is not so present, and also for the peace process. Is the Catholic Church now in the Colombian peace process? Are they involved? And if not, why not?
Okay, so I start with the first one, which is the most tricky, perhaps. When we look upon who will be our cooperation partners in Colombia, it's very important for us to work with different actors. We work with the Colombian government, we work with state institutions, and we also work quite a lot with civil society. And recently we have started up a fund to work directly with civil society, where we have clear criteria to look upon who will receive Swedish support through this fund. And one of the criteria for selection is the gender perspective, because it's not only the Catholic Church in Colombia that have some challenges regarding gender equality. It's quite a broad challenge for the whole society, I would say. And when we work with different peace movements in Colombia, I'm a little bit sad to say that several of them is really not working with women as actors for peace. And this is one of the main priorities for Swedish development cooperation in Colombia, to promote the UN Security Resolution 1325. Women as actors for peace. Women can contribute to peace in Colombia and all over the world. So this is for us a huge challenge, not only working with the Catholic Church, working with almost everyone in Colombia. As we discussed a little bit yesterday, where are the Colombian women in the negotiation table in Havana? They are not present in the front row. They are a little bit back. So it's a challenge for the whole Colombian society, including several of our cooperation partners in Colombia. And regarding the current peace negotiation, if the Catholic Church is present or not, as we have discussed previously, the peace negotiations are taking place in Havana between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrilla. And that is how the government and the FARC decided to do it. They want to have it a little bit more closed to hopefully advance a bit faster. They have some experience a few years ago when they had a much broader participatory process and it didn't work out. So now it's only between the the two parties of the conflict. That does not mean that the Catholic Church cannot give their view and influence. A few weeks ago, the Colombian Peace Commissioner had a very interesting meeting with the main bishops of Colombia. And they were discussing how the Catholic Church can be a positive force in the implementation of the peace accord in the regional level. How can all community, Catholic Church, civil society, everyone that lives in this region where the conflict is so present, how can they work jointly to create peace from a local level? And there I think the Catholic Church and other organizations for civil society, jointly with the local authorities, it's fundamental for the future of Colombia. Everyone needs to work together to really have a sustainable peace in Colombia.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, I have two questions for you also, and one of them is not an easy one maybe, but inevitable to ask you when you are here, and that is your view on the current happenings in Egypt right now. And the second question is, I mean, you've said that you've discovered in your report that it's clearly not so much about religion for people, the conflict. People are not, I mean, there are other issues that are more important. Why do you think that still, I mean, in Sweden and in maybe other countries, the conflicts, a lot of the conflicts in Middle East are portrayed as about religion? That is a lot of the media coverage that we get. And why do you think that is?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can take the example of what is happening in Egypt now and how it's portrayed in the media. I mean, I think across the board, whether in the United States or in Europe, we see the headlines mainly outlining what is happening as being a military coup, for example. And what you notice is that the coverage reduces what's happening to Islamists and military generals, and they completely miss out on the populace, the popular force within what's happening in Egypt right now. And I think the Western audience are meant to not sympathize with what's happening in Egypt right now, because what is happening is a challenge to a project that has been, worked on and invested in for a long time to serve the interests of the United States, for example. So the Muslim Brotherhood regime represented a perfect scenario. And to be fairly honest with you, I think the United States and perhaps some of the Western democracies as well, they do not care about Islamists as long as they are new liberal capitalists. That's what matters. So it doesn't matter if you have a beard or if you come in a secular way. What matters is what are your economic policies. So the Muslim Brotherhood, with their new liberal policies and also the very important role of being a middleman between the United States and Hamas, their overthrow completely challenges, the roadmap of the United States for the region. So for the West to sympathize with a truly democratic grassroots a movement that is taking place in Egypt right now would pose this kind of challenge to the United States project or the hegemonic project in the region. Yeah, I think maybe that answers your questions a bit.
Yes, Isaac.
Yeah, I would like to ask you a question, Mohammed, and that's you were talking about the religious identities as not being important because they are not the real cleavages in a society. And I think that's a very, very good point. And actually we can see in our research that if parties come from different religious traditions, it does not affect the likelihood that they reach a peace deal. So these conflicts are not more difficult to resolve than conflicts where parties come from the same religious tradition. So I think the idea that religious identities is something problematic, and this whole idea about clash of civilizations and so forth is a very problematic one, and that have very little empirical support actually.
Yes.
But there is a growing, that said, there is a growing tension the last month actually between the Shia and the Sunni in the Middle East. So I would like to ask you about your perceptions about this, because we see that happening in Iraq right now. We see that happening in Syria, and also with the involvement of Lebanon in being dragged into the Syrian conflict. So what could you explore a little bit on this fault line?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me just perhaps rephrase that. I mean, religious identities are important in the Egyptian society, but they are not the root cause of conflicts, that's for sure. I mean, socioeconomic circumstances come first. I mean, that's without a doubt. Certainly, the religious tolerance, if you want to put it this way, is a byproduct of development. So as long as people, are prosperous and comfortable in their lives, I mean, we're not going to see like religiously motivated conflicts. That's for sure. When it comes to the issue of Sunni and Shia, that's also interesting because that's one of the things that the Muslim Brotherhood regime had served by being in power, served the Western interests, is that for the first time we see openly in the media, incitements and hate speech against the very small Shia population in Egypt, and that's very, very new for the Egyptian society. So I think the Muslim Brotherhood was kind of playing a role in the alliance against, the Syria, Hezbollah, Iran force in the region. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if you're aware, that President Morsi has announced, that he opens the door for Egyptians to go and fight in Syria. But it's funny that this came directly after the United States had decided to arm the resistance in Syria, because the conflict has been going on. I mean, Morsi has been in power for over a year and nothing had been done about the Syrian conflict, but only after the United States had decided to arm the resistance. Almost the next day, we find this conference, and Morsi calls on the Egyptian population to go out and take arms against the Syrian regime. So this is one important role that the Muslim Brotherhood had been playing in the region.
I thank you so much. I think a lot of people in the audience want to come in, but first I'm going to give you a small assignment. Not really an assignment, but before we finish, I want you all to just very briefly say something on how something that's important for religions to be a peace-building force, or something that you think that you want to, something that we need for that from your experience. But we have about 15 minutes, and I'm going to let the audience in for sometimes. And I think it's great. I think we have a microphone somewhere. Yes, good. And when you ask questions, you have to speak in the microphone. I want to remind you to just say your name and that this is a question, not, if you have a clear question, and be quite brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Yes. My name is Dina Carlton. I work at SIDA with democracy issues. I think you play down identity politics as it's used a little bit. I have a very bitter experience from Sri Lanka, and there one ethnic identity, and also coupled with religion, just killed and slaughtered its opponent. And I think we have to be very careful. I think that Noha, you are doing the right thing, and I'm so happy for the kind of work that you are doing that can help us deal with identity politics in Sweden. I hope so. But I would like you to not to run away from the issues of identity politics and how it's used. I think you should pinpoint it a little bit more and see what are the possibilities to get away from identity politics, to have politics that is based on the real issues, the socio-economic things.
Thank you. It wasn't a question, but maybe you want to comment. Okay, you want to comment on this. So, Mohammed.
It's okay. I mean, I also want to make clear that I'm not really downplaying the role of identity politics. I'm just saying that it is not the root causes of the conflicts are not rooted in identity. As Isak also mentioned, which is very true, is that usually they come at a later stage, in a conflict. But the conflicts are primarily rooted in socio-economic circumstances. And to answer the second part of your question, I think, according to what we've seen with the study, and in my opinion, that by bypassing the formal or official channels, whether it's political or religious, and creating communication on a grassroots level between different members of different communities, I think naturally people come to coexist together. I think all the heightened rhetoric that might create tension between the two different communities primarily comes through the political and fundamentalist religious elite. So I have a lot of hope actually in new media and in information technology to play a major role in this, in bypassing the hierarchical structure and creating communication on a more grassroots level between different members of different communities. Yeah.
I think the Sri Lankan example. I think the Sri Lankan example is a very interesting one because it has both the two dimensions of religion in it. You have in the conflict that was ongoing between the LTTE and the government, you had on the rebel side a predominantly Hindu based group against a predominantly Sinhala Buddhist regime in government. So you had the identity politics there, but you also had a religious dimension in the issue. So one of the demands from the LTT was a secular state. They wanted to create an own state, but they also wanted to take away this idea that Buddhism should have a foremost place in the constitution. So the identity and the issue were intermingled and intertwined in the Sri Lankan conflict, and you could see in this conflict also that the religious actors, primarily the Buddhist monks, played a very negative role, a very, very negative role. There were some Buddhist clergy who were also on the active peace movements, but predominantly they played a very negative role in at every step of the peace process, trying to create obstacles for the Norwegian-led peace process there. So it shows how, the way in which religion can actually have a negative role in conflicts.
Thank you.
My name is Isaac. I'm the ambassador of Israel in Sweden. And I would like to refer to the repeating ritual in the month of the Ramadan. We're going to enter this month in a few days of having repeating TV shows and series of TV that preaches the hatred of Jews and Israelis alike, when they show how Jews are slaughtering children, drinking their blood, and all the, the old stuff that the cheapest hatred that brings families together during the days of fast of the Ramadan, in front of the TV with good food to break the fast every day. So my question is, to what extent do you think this brings to a perpetuation of the conflict? And to what extent is this viewed by the masses as propaganda or as truth, on the other hand?
Is your question to someone special in the panel or to... No, anyone. Okay, anyone feel...
Perhaps I could take that
yes.
one.
Mohammed.
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that the issue of hatred and propaganda is happening on both sides of the conflict, whether the Israeli or Palestinian or Egyptian. I myself have seen Israeli cartoons, talking about how filthy Arabs are, and that we should, kill and so on and so forth, which do exist also in the Arab world. And without a doubt, the media plays a massive role, in creating a conflict or creating a resolution. But the problem is, as I mentioned before, that the media usually belongs to the state or is, heavily influenced by the state. So the hope is for people to build channels of communication outside of these, formal channels, outside state media and so on. So that is the hope. The hope is not in satellite channels and so on.
Thank you. Anyone else want to say something on this issue? Okay, thank you. So we have time for one or two more questions. Nobody. Yes, of course, Isaac.
About the role of the Catholic Church in Latin America, I think it's very interesting what you said, and I think it plays into a general pattern. We have been in Uppsala examining, mapping out the faith-based mediation efforts that have been taking place in armed conflict. And the general pattern that you find there is that faith-based mediators are commonly active when faith unites the two parties, the two sides, and when the issue is not religious. So the faith-based actor seems to be active in the kind of conflict which are not religious, either in the identity aspect or in the religious issues. So is this something that you could have seen in your work, how religion, when it's not been polarized, can actually be used as a constructive force?
Yes, I totally share what you're saying. I totally share, Isaac, what you are saying. I think that is exactly what is taking place in Colombia, because there we have seen the role of the Catholic Church in dialoguing with the armed actors. For instance, the Catholic Church in Colombia is the only actor that is allowed to have a dialogue with the illegal armed actors. So they have managed, for instance, to get kidnapped civil population released from the guerrilla group. So the Catholic Church has played and is playing a very important role. And that is what you are saying also. It is not about religion in Colombia. The conflict has other root causes, and religion can actually join the two parties. All of them are more or less in some way part of the Catholic thinking.
Anyone else want to reflect on this or something else that's been said now? Okay, I'll give you one more chance for questions, and after that we'll move on.
My name is Milos Kouch, and I would like to ask you, Mohammed, in the recent months there's been a huge debate between Egypt and Ethiopia and many other countries in the region about the Millennium Dam being built on the Blue Nile. And we've also seen that the Coptic Pope in Egypt has met with their counterparts of the Coptic Church in Ethiopia. We don't really know what has been said, but what is your perception on that process? And in that case, if the Pope can mediate, it would be also one maybe of the examples of where religion crossing borders actually can help to resolve problems?
To be very honest with you, I don't have a lot of insight on this issue. It's not really being covered properly in the media, at least in Egypt. Since it's like a national security issue and so on. So I couldn't really tell. I'm sorry.
I follow up on a question. This is the Sunni Shia discussion, and maybe the representative from the Muslim peace movement here. I mean, this is, I think, is a challenge that we see evolving now. So I'm just curious to know, are there ideas about project to bridge the Shia-Sunni divide? Are there discussions about what are the implications for this, and can we develop the kind of multi-faith dialogue that is used mostly between Christians and Muslims, if I understand it correctly, to apply to this emerging sort of tension, sectarian tension?
Not for the moment, but I would be open for that. It's a really good idea.
So before we finish, I want to say that those of you who are interested to talk and listen more about what's going on in Egypt, there's a seminar that begins at 10:30 here on Egypt with Bitte Hammargren, Swedish journalist, Peter Wallenstein, professor at the Uppsala University, and Fredrik Uggla from Stockholm University. So please come back if you're leaving and listen to that as well. But then I'd like to ask this, to thank this panel first, but I want to ask you to, if you want to do some concluding remarks for the audience and for us to take from this seminar on the issue of religion as a peace-building force. Mohammed.
Perhaps it's not a concluding remark, but it's a remark. I just wanted to say that recently sexual harassment in Egypt has been used as a very strong political tool to keep women out of demonstrations and out of being present in a public space. There has been a lot of organized mob attacks on female demonstrators. And currently there are two organizations that I am in contact with that are working with this issue. Harass Map and Anti-Sexual Harassment, Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment. So if any of you would like to know more about this or would like to help, I'll be more than willing to speak to afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you. Emma?
Yes, to answer your assignment on how we see the religion in peace construction in the future. In Colombia, we are hopefully entering within shortly, I hope, in a process of reintegration of former ex-combatants. The FARC guerrilla hopefully will stop the conflict, and they need to reintegrate in the society. And here I think that the religious leaders and the church has an important role to play in regarding reconciliation, because now we will have victims of the conflict and ex-combatants. They have to live side by side. This is a huge challenge for the society to really build peace together. Who wants to have an ex-FARC as a neighbor? Maybe not so many. So this is really where I think religious leaders and the church and others can help to try to rebuild trust, respect, and to work as one country.
Thank you. Nofa?
I would say that if we could start with simple tolerance, maybe that would lead to deep respect and even appreciation. And I think that this is my vision with the Friends of Salam, that we could be equal, but also seen for our uniqueness.
Thank you. Isaac?
Yeah, I think there is a need to have a sort of realistic perspective on the role of religion in conflict, not to overemphasize religion, which is often done in media in the discussion, or not neglecting the religious dimension of armed conflict either. So there are two extremes in the debate, I think, and a more fruitful approach would be to look at the conditions under which religion impedes settlements. And I just want to end by saying that I have a book that that is called Ending Holy Wars, Religion and Conflict Resolution in Civil Wars, which is coming out in autumn in Sweden. So
Good.
if you're interested in
Yes.
that, you can.
Thank you so much, Isak. And finally, I want to say that the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation, we work with peace building in very many different areas. Through preventive presence in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Mexico, through support to nonviolent movements in Western Sahara and Egypt, and through supporting religious dialogue, for example, in Sudan and South Sudan. And if you want to, and of course with Salam's Friends of Salam, together with the Muslim Peace Movement. And if you want to know more about our work, you can find it. We have folders outside, and we have a website. Even better, become a member of the Swedish Fellowship of Reconciliation and support our work. And I want to say a very warm thank you to this panel, and for sharing with us, for discussing with us, and to the audience for coming and listening. Thank you.